All right, guys, here we are. Happy 4th of, well, what is it? Today is the 12th of April. It's Easter for those of you that celebrate such a holiday. Beautiful day here in California, so we're actually going to get a chance to get some proper content going today. So I'm going to give just a couple of minutes here while we wait for people to join the chat, both on Facebook and on YouTube, as always. And then we're going to get going. So if I'm looking off to the side, just taking a look at that. And we'll get started in just about 2 minutes. All right, so while we're getting going, I want to just talk about what we're going to be going over today. So our material that we're going to work on, the first thing we're going to talk about today is the Meyer square, the 4 openings drill. There have been a couple of videos that were made in the last day or so that were really good kind of views of it. We got a couple of new ones. The Meyer square as a drill is one of those things that people do a ton. Whether or not they're doing it the right way is really going to be one of the main questions ultimately involved with it. There are, in the book, a particular way that it's given. And I have a video that we're going to run that was made by Thomas Carrillo of the Fresno Frifector that does a really good job of showing the the drill exactly as Meyer describes. And then I have a second video that we're going to watch as well on the square that was done by Mark Hollinshead of the Santa Cruz Frifector, and that's kind of putting it into application in modern training while still being true to its roots. When people do this drill, a lot of times, a very common element that will happen is they read the directions in Meyer and then they go off and they do it, and they focus just on doing it as a series of ascending and descending cuts, right? And that's not really necessarily all that the drill is good for. It can be used for so much more than that. So I think what I want to do first is we're going to watch the video. I'm going to run it from Thomas because it's going to kind of show us exactly the way that Meyer envisions the drill and what he tells us about it. And then after that, we can talk about it a little bit, see if you have any thoughts on that. Then we'll look at kind of Mark putting it into application with some Pell work. And then I've got my Pell behind me. We might kind of look at some ways that we can take it even one step further and approach it a little bit differently above and beyond that. So as always, guys, while I'm going, if you have any questions, just go ahead and type them into chat and I will respond to them as quick as I can. Today, it's a beautiful day, so I'm going to have some, especially when we get to our main drilling sessions, I'm going to be doing some of the drill live, but I do have some pre-recorded stuff as well, just so we can have that ready to go. So without any further ado, let's go ahead and watch Thomas Carrillo's take on the Meyer square.
In this video, we'll be looking at the 4 openings drill, also known as the Meyer square. Now there's a bunch of videos already out on YouTube about this drill, but I don't know of any video that presents the drill the way Meyer actually wrote it. It's almost like people didn't actually read the book and instead just looked at this graphic here. So just to give a very brief overview of the drill itself, this drill is a series of 4 sets of 4 cuts. Each set is represented by a ring of numbers, starting with the outermost 1, then 2, then 3, and 4. The next set is 1, 2, 3, 4 on the next innermost circle, etc. Please note, the graphic in the book differs from the text. In the text, the 3rd and 4th sets are switched, which makes more sense as now the first cut in each set just rotates around the board clockwise, while the graphic, as presented, really has no rhyme or reason that I can think of. So the first thing we have to address is using this as a solo drill. Now, I'm going to try to not editorialize on every variation of this drill that I've seen, but I am going to on this one part. So using this as a solo drill I think is fine. Like, it can't hurt to do it. But this drill, as presented by Meyer, is a paired drill, plain and simple. You're meant to attack to a partner's opening, and you need a sword in front of you in order for some of this to work as intended. So you'll get a lot more out of it if you do it with a partner. But sometimes there's not a training partner handy, and I think it's just fine to practice this solo as well. Coincidentally, due to the logistics of filming on the day that we did, we will be showing this drill performed solo. Now, let's move on to the setup. That is, the movements you're going to do before you make the 4 cuts. We are told to stand about a fathom, which is 6 feet, away from our opponents, and deliver a series of strokes in front of our opponent. These strokes, which foregoing translates as slash, is typically a short edge cut made upwards, usually to clear space in front of you, and to get your sword out of a lower guard and into a higher one. Once we have delivered our strokes about 3 times through our opponent's face, we want to finish in long point with our left foot forward. This long point position is the posture that we will be attacking from. Meyer does not instruct us to cut from any other posture. Run off and cut to the first target. For this demonstration, we'll be using the first set, so first is from your upper right. We will not be waving our sword around completely through the lines. As this is a pair drill, it will stop at the midpoint when the opponent parries your sword. Once this is done, you will pull your sword back. Pulling is done by pulling the hilt back to where you want to cut from next. So, since we want to cut to the lower left opening, we want to pull back into something resembling left ox for that Unterhau. The left Unterhau is meant to cut through the opponent's arms, if they're in the way, and up into his jaw. You are not to cut into his abdomen. After this second cut is parried, we want to cut another Unterhau to the other side. So we are going to jerk our hilt back again and throw that next cut again into his jaw. Finally, we will swing the blade around our head and cut down into the upper left opening. Once this is done, we are done with our cuts. Never does Meyer say that all 16 cuts should be done in a row. After the 4th cut, we want to end the set by safely withdrawing from our opponent. Do this by throwing a couple Zwerchhaus as you move away. If you want to continue on to the 2nd set or further, go ahead and start the setup again with the striking up into long point. Here's the drill performed all together at speed. That's how you do the most basic version of the 4 openings drill. If there's interest, I can make a video demonstrating the variations that Meyer presents in the future. Thank you, and happy practicing.
All right, guys. So I think Thomas did a really good job of kind of demonstrating the basics of the Meyer square, the way that Meyer wanted you to approach it, at least if you're reading it exactly as he wrote it down in the 1570, right? Most notably during that, Thomas likes to point out that often when we practice it, we just do it as a series of 16 cuts, right? 4 different sets of cuts, 4 different openings, 4 different sequences that are going to come in together. And that's not really how Meyer wrote it. He definitely wrote it with an intent much more of being a drill where you're going to, really look at attacking to a single opening, then another, then another, then another, and then breaking off and escaping. And honestly, I think that is, from a training standpoint, something we need to get back to more often rather than just doing the 4 cuts or the 16 cuts and flowing them one into the next. For the simple reason that it's training bad habits in our fencing. Basically, what we're doing in that situation is we're going and we're building in this unrealistic expectation of the number of strikes that should be thrown in an exchange, right? If we're just practicing cutting. When we actually fight, realistically, in any given exchange, 4 to 5 strikes is a lot. Six is a really large number. If we're provoking, taking, and hitting, some of those are going to be things that are back in the Zufekten, out of range, not really fully with intent, maybe trying to draw a response from our opponent. Some of them are going to be a parry or two, and really only one, maybe two, should ultimately land a strike on our opponent. I really like the next video that I'm going to show for you guys from Mark Hollinshead of the Santa Cruz Freifechter, because he, even though he does sometimes go through and talk about going multiple in the pattern, he has a nice little finish that he adds on to his video or to his pattern when he's done with Meyer's 4 basics, and he has a reasoning for why he does that. So I'm going to go ahead and cue that up. Now, it looks like YouTube is having some trouble, so if you're watching on YouTube, I do apologize. Looks like Facebook this week is going to be the one that runs smoothly, whereas last week Facebook was giving me a hard time. So if you want to pop over and watch on Facebook, that might be easier, and I'll try and figure out why YouTube is not liking the videos. I think it's when I'm running stuff, it's not enjoying it. But let's go ahead and watch Mark's video.
Hi guys, I wanted to give you a follow-up on last week's Pellwork video. This week we're going to be focusing exclusively on the Meyer square. If you have been coming to the HEMA Club and you've been with us for a while, then you've done a few different drills based on Meyer's 4 opening sequence. If you haven't been coming to the club or you're new, you might not have worked with it yet, so I'm going to give you a very brief description. There are a lot of really good videos on the Meyer square or Meyer's 4 opening, so I don't want to get super in-depth because we're going to focus on something a little differently. But essentially, when I like to teach it, I teach it as 4 sets of 4 cuts. So the first starts from the upper right. I'm going to come standard Oberhau and then retrace that line, and that's your 2 cuts. And then from underneath, Unterhau, upward cut, and retrace that line. So I go down and back, up and back. That's 4 cuts. The next 4, you just reverse it. You start from underneath. So you're going to go up and back, and then down and back. And now you've done 8 cuts, and that's the first half of the Meyer square. Clearly, the other half is just everything from the left. So you start from the upper left, and then you start from the lower left. And these 4 openings really are targets, not cuts. But I find for memorization and flow, teaching them as the 4 sets of 4 cuts gets it into people's minds really quickly. So I have here my Pell and a backdrop. This is a 4 openings drill backdrop that Shani made for me a couple years ago, so I really appreciate that. And so it has, if you look at the outer set of numbers, that gives you your first 4 cuts, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then the next set of numbers in gives you 1, 2, 3, 4. So we're going to focus mostly on that half. What we're focusing on today is Meyer's descriptions and lessons on pulling your cuts, fakes. As Meyer says, this is the craft, and he says that your craft comes from here. So the pulling that he teaches you in this section, he says, leads to all the deceit, the flitting, the failing, all the cool stuff he likes to do. If you have Forgang's book, I'm working primarily on his descriptions from pages 73 and 74, and he gives us actual sequences to practice. So the first one is we throw number 1, and then we pull number 2, and then hit 3 and 4. So that is going to look something like this. So from here, I'm going to hit number 1, I'm going to pull 2, 3, and then 4. I want to come from underneath, hit number 1, pull 2, 3, and then 4. I can do the same thing if I want to pull number 3. So I'm going to come in 1, 2, 3, 4. And then 1, 2, 3, 4. So I'm pulling each one. If I pull 4, I like to go back to number 1. So if I come in and I come 1, 2, 3, pull 1, I like to come back to my initial number 1. 1, 2, 3, pull 1. I just find that that is a more natural flow to targets I would hit in actual sparring. Meyer also tells us that we can pull multiple cuts. So we can land number 1, pull 2 and 3, and then land number 4. So that would look like this. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. You can pull your initial cut as well. So from out here, I can come in 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. A couple of notes on fakes. You still want to do them in front. So if I'm 1, 2, 3, so using your pommel hand, having a loose lead hand to develop the power, What we don't want to do is this. We step in and we commit our body as we're transitioning when a fake. If we're not presenting a real threat to our opponent, they might just stab us in the face or hit us. So we want to commit our sword and then our body, just like with everything else. If we're pulling an initial attack, we need to make sure that they are buying the initial threat before we switch over. Otherwise, we're not defending ourselves or closing a line. So just make sure that you are practicing doing this in front and not doing a big around you, because that's definitely going to get you killed. This should give you a lot to work on. Mess with the sequence, pull all the different ones you can think of. Do it on the left side as well. And if you have any questions, send me a message and we'll talk.
All right, guys. Well, I apologize. I'm just noticing that I'm dropping a lot of frames. I'm not sure what exactly is going on there. Hoping to figure that out and kind of work through it and make it a little bit smoother experience. Not the best experience, I know. Let me adjust my camera here as well, getting a little bit of glare. Come over to the side. All right, so anyway, Mark does a great job with the Meyer square of introducing it. And it really is one of those drills that, is kind of fundamental to everything we do. Probably the biggest element that I want you to take away when you're going to practice it is that even though we always fall into this habit of, I'm going to do a Zornhau, then I'm going to do an Unterhau, then I'm going to do an Unterhau, then I'm going to do a Zornhau. That's not what Meyer tells us to do ultimately, or realistically what we should think of it as. We should think of it as attacks, strikes, thrusts, whatever the term you want to use, whatever works best for you, to those 4 openings, right? So you could do it as a series of thrusts to the 4 openings to practice it. You could do it as a series of strikes into thrusts, into short edge strikes to practice it. You could do it as a series of Unterhau to the upper openings and Zornhau to the lower openings to practice it. Each and every part of it should be changed up. Another thing to look at when you're playing around with that drill and when you're kind of integrating into it is it's all about kind of the alternating ways that we think about it. And often we think, okay, I go high, low, low, high. But just as easily, I could think of it as going right, from my left, from my left, from my right as well. And that kind of changes it up as well, like a 1, 2, 3, 4 kind of situation, and play around with it. It is one of those drills that you can start to take a deep dive on, and it will kind of push people in different ways for it. Looks like my stream is just getting worse and worse. I apologize, guys, if you're getting a ton of dropped frames on your end. It's all my fault, apparently, at the moment. What we're going to do, we're going to press forward, hoping that this starts to clear itself up. We're going to run through our warm-up today, and then our lesson for this week is going to be on the Unterhau, along with some of its variations. So let's go ahead and start the warm-up, and then we'll come back. Hopefully I'll have figured out what's going on by then, and we'll move on to the main lesson for the day. All right? All right, guys, it's time to get warmed up. We're going to use, once again, one of the cards, no longer available, sadly, but taken from Meyer's Rostock and Lund manuscript. You can find it on Wichtenauer for the various patterns. Here's the one that we're going to be working on, right here. Okay, so as you can see for this one, it's going to begin with a Mittelhau cutting across the center. Then we're going to have a series of Zornhaus, one first from the left, then from the right, followed by an Unterhau from the left, and finally an Oberstich from the right. So generally the kind of idea being that our first cut is going to come in through the center. 1. 2 is going to be our Zornhau. 3, Zornhau. 4, Unterhau. 5, finishing off in Ox. Okay? So we're going to do this one as kind of a standing in place sort of drill to warm up today for people with small apartments that they don't have a lot of room to move around, just kind of all in place. We're not going to worry too much about a provoker, taker, hitter setup, although we can talk about it as we go along. So our first cut coming in right through the middle. Mittelhau, 1, 2 with a Zornhau, 3, 4, 5, right through the middle. Okay. If we do look at this from the perspective of a provoker, taker, hitter, that first cut, stepping out to the side, 1, striking an overhowl maybe, out of the way. Then a cut right back down through, 2, 3, Unterhowl, bringing that point in line, thrust. There we go. Okay, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And again, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Forgot what I was doing for a second, guys. It happens sometimes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. 1, make sure we're cutting all the way through before we allow that sword to turn. 2, cutting down. 3, cutting down. 4, right back up. 5, thrusting in. Let's play around with it. Maybe try a different variation on it, different footwork patterns, see what we get out of it. For instance, all with the hip. 1, cut through. 2, cut down. 3, cut down. 4, cut up. 5, finish with the thrust. So one of the nice things on these patterns is that you can do them in different ways. Change up kind of the experience as you're going along. We can reverse it easily enough. There's no reason it has to be from one side or the other. So, for instance, getting through 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Right? And then back to the other side. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay? So we're just going to work through that, as always with these warm-ups, just trying to get the joints nice and limber. Make sure you're feeling good. Probably work through it a couple more times here just to be sure, and then we'll move on. All right, hopefully you're feeling nice and warm. Let's move on. All right, guys, hopefully things are going to start to clear up here and get going. Seems like it might be running a little bit smoother now, so that's good. Not seeing any questions yet on either side, so I'm going to go ahead and keep pressing on. Like I said, today our lesson is going to be on the Unterhau, and we're going to work through it, kind of looking at the general principles of it, what we want to look for as part of it. Then we're going to follow up and do a little drilling with it, a couple of sets, just to get those cuts out there and get them feeling proper. Then we'll look at some variations on the Unterhau, notably doing the Windhau, the winding strike that Meyer will use. And I want to talk a little bit as part of that of getting into that particular bind situation. It is a type of parry that Meyer uses all over the place, but that we don't actually do very often. So let me go ahead and get that fired up, and we'll continue. All right, for our lesson today, we're going to be focusing on the Unterhau, and we're also going to throw in a couple of the small cut variations that come out of the Unterhau as well. So the Unterhau is one of Meyer's 4 principal cuts. After, the Oberhau, the Zornhau, and the Mittelhau, the Unterhau is generally the 4th in it. Having said that, arguably, it should really come a lot higher on that list, as it is going to form the basis of really any parry that comes from below is going to be through the Unterhau. So that's going to be something that we're going to look at with this today. Meyer gives the Unterhau in a couple of different ways, and one of the biggest differences between the way that people practice it and the way that Meyer describes it is when he first describes it, he's actually starting it from Ox. There's a lot of reasons for this. It's especially if your main targets are going to be to the head, then having the hands high, it's important. But it's also used as a parry with the hands high so that you're still protected through the whole thing. So we're going to look at it both ways. For beginners, starting down in a position like Nebenhut and going straight up into the Unterhau is often going to be easier, but learning to get it and making it effective out of Ox is absolutely something you're going to want to work towards. Starting there, though, might not be the best since getting edge alignment is kind of difficult. So to begin, I'm going to use my friend here as our target, and we'll start the first one down in our position of kind of a Nebenhut. Now, there's a lot of debates on what is Nebenhut, right? Meyer tells us the long edge stands below, the short edge stands above, the pommel is above the point. Okay, so we see in Paulus Hector Meyer a tail guard position where he's even turned away, right? Almost as if I was in Alber and then looking at an opponent coming from the other side. We could have versions that are here. There's even, kind of funky ones that are up higher. Ultimately, for us, for our purposes, we're going to treat Nebenhut as a position similar to Wechselhut, where we've struck down and then turned the long edge forward. Okay. When we cut with the Unterhau, especially from these low guard positions, whichever hand is pointed down is going to be the one that's going to do the driving, right? And it really is almost as a one-handed cut. So if I'm down here in Nebenhut and I want to cut up, I'm going to do it, in this case, through my left hand, okay? On the other hand, if I'm cutting from my right, or excuse me, cutting from my left to my right, then I'm going to use the other hand. I'm going to use my right hand to drive that cut, because now its palm is pointing at the ground. If you're a left-hander, it'll, of course, be reversed. So we'll start with a left foot forward, a non-dominant foot forward, and we're going to drive our first cut. And just like everything else, it's going to kind of follow our general rule for beginners for right now of the sword leads the body, leads the sword. Okay? So in this case, we're going to start bringing the sword forward. 1, which is going to lead us to our hip turn. 2, casting the sword out long. 3, getting it out there in front of us, essentially getting out into Hangentort at this point. Then we can step forward. 4 and 5, the actual strike will occur. All right, especially when done with a slight step offline to get out of the way of the incoming strike. We'll see that We're going to come up through the Hangentort, excuse me, up ultimately into Einhorn, cutting all the way through. So if I were to do it without my target in front of me, striking up and through to block. Okay. From there, if I've gained a parry, bringing the point back on and coming in with it is going to be where I want to come that from. So I'm basically doing this entire cut one-handed. Okay, as I strike through. My right hand in this case is just helping to guide and maintain my angle. It's not, in that situation, doing the driving. And in fact, if I try and drive with my right hand as it comes from below, I'm going to have some problems that I'm going to run into. So we want to make sure in a cut from our right to our left that it's our left hand that's doing the driving, versus the opposite. If I'm cutting from my left to my right, now when I do the cutting, it's all coming from my left side. So it's going to strike up through, gain that bind if necessary, turn the point, thrust, or short edge. And we'll talk about the difference on those two in just a second. And so my left hand's going to be nice and loose. It's going to strike up in, come through, and then, as necessary, turn and strike, or all the way through and a little short edge pop for the friends. So that's what we're going to work on here first, is we're going to do some sets of our Unterhau. We're going to cut through the air without a target in the place. But if you have a Pell, if you have something you can strike against, absolutely make use of that. We'll do 3 1-minute sets of that ultimately. But then we're going to come back after we're done with that, take a little break for questions, and then we're going to go into some of the variations on this Unterhau. We're going to look specifically at things like using it for short edge strikes after a bind, and the Windhau, the winding strike or the winding cut that Meyer introduced to us in the 1570. So let's get set and jump on that. Yeah. All right, so there we go. Working through on that. So we're going to do now, guys, a few sets to work through on it. I got my timer set up down here for you guys over here. And I think what we'll do is 3 sets of 1 minute each, 30-second rest in between, just to kind of work through on that before we continue on. It looks like I might have fixed the frame rate issue, so hopefully everything is running more smoothly now. I'm going to go ahead and start the timer. If you got your sword, go ahead and grab it and follow along. And we're going to work through this to get those sets in. Then we're going to come back and we're going to look at some of the variations on the Unterhau that we want to work on today. Okay, so let me go ahead and turn on my timer. Timer's on. There we go. My kid's sword. Warning. And we'll rest. All right, 30-second rest, and then we're going to keep going. So kind of working through here, seeing where we're at. All right. Got about 15 seconds. My timer, guys, will give a warning during the work at 30 seconds and a 10-second warning when we're about to start. 10 seconds. 30 seconds. And rest. 30 seconds. All right, 10 seconds, last set, and then we'll move on. Seconds. All right. There's our time. We'll go ahead and turn that off. So, working through, feeling good. Let's look at some of the variations. All right, so now that we've worked on our basic version of the Unterhau, let's look at some of the variations that Meyer does. The first, as I noted, is going to be when we strike the Unterhau from Ox, okay? Taking my sword down for the moment. We'll put it back up in a second. But basically, it's going to be from the position of Ox, tighten our fingers, and now we're basically coming up into kind of a, still an Ox, kind of a Vomtag position, Einhorn if you will, rotate through into Nebenhut, right? At this point, the pommel stands above, the point below, long edge down, short edge up, cast the sword out long with our hip turn, and there's our strike, right through, as it comes, okay? So 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Right through, okay? And so that gives us that nice high strike. Now, it's really important when you're doing it from up here in Ox that you get that strike through before you really start to move forward. The last thing we want to do is start to kind of step forward with the sword back so that we get struck, right? It's a great opportunity right here for a hit to be landed. Alternatively, we start to swing it around. It's really easy to lose our edge alignment and come in flat. And you're going to see that a lot if you watch people strike with it. Go watch some random sparring or tournament videos, and you'll see that flat strike landing in there because we're not getting the sword out there properly lined up. I'm sure if I looked for videos of myself, I could find that happening. It's just something we all do. So after you've got good at doing it from below, also do it high, sending the cuts into the bottom of the chin, up into the armpits for the lower cut. Work on that. Then, after we've got that, another version of the Unterhau, and one that arguably I think is even more important, is going to be the Windhau, as I mentioned earlier. So let me get the sword set up, and we're going to look at it. Okay, we've got our sword set up, so let's look at the Windhau. This is one of those ones that there's a bit of interpretation that can go on for it, right? Meyer tells us that we're cutting into it when we're being attacked from above, right? And that we're going to go up with our arms crossed such that our pommel is pushed under our right arm, okay? Is there a step that we're taking on this? Well, that's kind of hard to know, right? Meyer doesn't specifically say, other than the step that will be taken out and to the side during the action. So we're going to look at it through both ways, right foot and left foot forward, and kind of see how that changes things up. At the end of the day, I don't think it's that big of an issue. If we're left foot forward or right foot forward, we can end up in this position in a variety of ways. Okay, so let's do the first one with a left foot forward stance. We're basically assuming here that we're in some low guard, maybe down in Alber, and we're trying to draw that attack to come in at our heads, okay? So as the strike comes in, we're going to cut up from below with crossed arms, catching their strike on our strong, ideally, okay? And then in the moment that we feel the contact occur, we're going to step out with our left leg away from their strike and pull our sword around in a looping action above our heads to cut through from above. So I'm going to step out and strike, right? And we see this when Meyer does it in the images. He leaves us a drawing of this particular one. It's plate H, and I'll put it up now. So you can see that we're striking in and then we're stepping out with the left foot. If I'm left foot forward and catching that, I can definitely then step away nice and long, creating this distance that's going to be very hard for the person to chase through behind it. Now, whether that's into their head, into the arms, either way, it's a decent strike. If I do it from a right foot forward stance, in this scenario, as we strike up into it, we actually find ourselves in that plate A position, getting that initial parry that is shown to us as the very first image we see. And now that left foot step really makes sense. So arguably for myself, I think that the position Meyer's giving us here, and it kind of goes in line with other stuff, is that we've provoked an attack by striking in front of the person down into Alber, Vexel, some low guard point off line that draws that attack from above, so that then we're going to cut back up, hands underneath, and then immediately step and draw the cut through and out. So when you work on this, practice both versions, right? Do it both left foot forward and right foot forward. There's also no particular reason that we couldn't do this from the other side. Now, it's not going to be crossed through in the same way, but if that strike is coming in and I go up to catch it in my parry, nice long edge, okay, my Pel's been seeing a lot of work lately, then pull through underneath and come back out and down. We can do either version of the attack. But the winding is kind of the important point on this. Strike up and out, right? And if you're going to practice this solo without a Pel or a partner, right, really focus on that idea of how am I coming up from below? Am I striking up through the hanging point, the hanging tort into the Einhorn, then looping and stepping back out, striking through the face, through the arm, whatever it is, and practice it to both sides. So we strike up in, turn, and strike right back down through. And so we get one of the windings that Meyer's giving us. In this case, the winding occurring as a looping action that's going to come back down through the face. There's something we're going to talk about later of using the rows to fully understand the windings. So we'll come back to this in a future class or a standalone video on the page. For now, let's run through just a couple of sets of practicing the winding strike, right? The Ventau from below. I think we'll do 2 minutes, 2 1-minute sets to just work that out. Let's get ready to it and get started. All right, so there we go. We've got that particular Vintau, the winding cut, looked at. So let's go ahead and do a couple of sets of it. So I'm going to do 2 different sets. I'm going to do one where I'm going to be stepping forward to strike, then coming up with it, and then back in, and then the other one that I'll just do it with a hip turn in between. So that's going to be my 2 1-minute sets that I'm going to work out for this. as we go through. So, as always, if you have any questions, go ahead and type them into the chat down below. Let me switch over so that I can see it. There we go. And we'll go ahead and get started in just a second. Strike down in, up, out. Strike down in. Ah, missed my step. In, out. Do it this way. Pop, pop. Having some issues here with my Pel. Trying to do some of these drills without a partner, not always the easiest thing in the world. All right, sorry, kind of sloppy there. Trying to do some of these drills completely without a partner is difficult, right? Probably the biggest problem while we're stuck here on our forced kind of isolation, our social distancing, if you will, is that we don't have somebody to practice with. And a lot of these drills really need somebody. All right, let's get going. And was that my time to start? 6 seconds. Here we go. We can do this one with hip turns. So up, down, up, down. 30 seconds, losing my pipe. Keep it going, guys. Sorry. Do that one again. All right, and rest. Yeah, trying to do these without a partner, not always the easiest thing in the world. Go ahead and reset there. So, guys, we're coming up on the 50-minute mark. Do you have any other questions? Is there anything else that you want to cover? I do apologize for the technical issues today. Apparently my internet wasn't able to handle the initial upload speeds that I was trying to ask of it. Comcast, what are you going to do? I will work on that for next week, and hopefully one of these days we're going to iron out these technical issues and have everything running nice and slowly from beginning to end, or smoothly, I should say, not slowly. Otherwise, keep an eye on the channel. We've got videos going up every day. If you haven't, subscribe to our YouTube channel. I'll throw a link up on Facebook. If you're on YouTube, click that subscribe button, maybe hit that like button, maybe leave a comment, ask me a question, make a complaint, yell at me, tell me I'm wrong. I love it, any of it. Let's go with there. But guys, it has been a real pleasure today. If there are no other questions, I don't see any, I'm gonna go ahead and end the stream at this point, and we'll see you next week and every day along the way. Cheers.